Hello, everyone. We'll begin now. You can take your seats. I'll be starting the meeting until our chair, Samira, arrives, and then she'll take over as chair. Good evening. Of course, we'll begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands which constitute the present-day region of Peel as being part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of the Huron-Wendat, and the Wyandot nations. We recognize that these peoples and their ancestors as peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The region of Peel is home to many global Indigenous peoples. Welcome to our second community consultation hosted by the Peel Services Board, the Police Services Board, Governance and Human Rights Committee. Those here today and to everyone watching our live stream, our testament to the collective commitment we share in fostering meaningful dialogue about police governance and human rights within our community. Your contributions are not merely confined to this session, they hold a pivotal role in shaping the Peel Police Services Board's future actions. So thank you for participating. My committee colleagues and I are eager to listen to your discussions and your presentations. Before we move to our first presenter, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to each of you this evening. I know a few folks are still on their way and we have some online. Our first presentation today will be provided to us by Jaskrin Sandhu, representing the World Sikh Organization, WSO. He is online. Just get confirmation. Maybe he can say something. There you go. Jaskrin, you can hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. So Jaskrin, and for all our presenters, you'll have 5 minutes to provide your remarks, and I will let you know when you reach those 5 minute mark. Following the presentation, my colleagues here may ask some questions to clarify for clarifications from your discussion. Thank you, and you can begin.
Yeah, so I'll keep this snappy, and hopefully we'll have some questions at the end that I'm more than happy to provide deeper kind of context where needed. I think it's important that we understand and appreciate the perspectives of different communities, and that's constructive and meaningful perspective for policing and governance of policing in Peel region, which to the surprise of no one, continues to be one of the fastest growing regions, not just in Ontario, but in the country. And that comes with it, obviously, very unique challenges. From the Sikh community's perspective, Peel region is really the center of the diaspora here in this country. And very quickly, just again, to provide some context of the kind of numbers we're looking at, Sikhs in Canada now amount to almost 800,000 people, and that's according to official census numbers. Community numbers, internal community numbers would argue that it's probably closer to 1 million when you consider folks from the international student community, as well as individuals that may be continuing to move to Canada. So that number is obviously fluctuating, and we believe it's closer to 1 million. When you look at where that community, that diaspora community exists within Canada, it's primarily in Peel. Brampton is home to the largest Sikh community in Canada. Mississauga, especially the northern half of Mississauga, is home to a very large community, and then Caledon is also, especially the southern half of Caledon, is home to a large community. And so it's roughly believed that half the Sikh community, or close to half the Sikh community, exists in Ontario, with the other half existing between British Columbia and Alberta. And the community is at a fairly mature stage in Ontario, and we obviously settled first in British Columbia, but the community has grown rapidly in Ontario. You see large gurdwaras. Two of the largest gurdwaras in Canada are actually in Peel. They border Brampton, Mississauga, with the Malton Gurdwara and Dixie Gurdwara. You have large institutions that exist within the community, and that goes from advocacy orgs like the one I belong to, the World Sikh Organization, as well as agencies such as Punjabi Community Health Services, for example, that service the Sikh community, largely the Sikh community, as well as others. And so the community is fairly mature and can provide a lot of insight if brought to the table. Now, in experience in terms of hate is obviously always evolving, and the Sikh community is no stranger to experiencing hate crime. And in fact, out of all minority communities is one that stands out in the experience it has with hate crimes. National data is harder to come by, but we know that when you look at local level examples, there's quite a few. Gurdwaras have also faced vandalisms over the years. Sikhs also happen to be victims of Islamophobia. It's an example that's held up often, American one, albeit. But the first victim post 9/11 of Islamophobia was actually a Sikh who was killed mistakenly under the belief that they were from the Muslim faith. The other experience, and this is maybe a little more timely considering what's in the news nowadays, is foreign interference. And there's a lot of hate being imported from abroad, especially when you see what's happening in India. And now that we've seen the extreme extent of it, it also includes, potentially in our organization's belief, concretely, assassinations or the murder of Canadian Sikhs on Canadian soil by agents of foreign governments. Just another piece on that too is the different type of organizations that may exist within PL in Canada that are importing the kind of hate we see in places like India, especially with the rise of Hindu nationalism. The NCCM, which is the National Advocacy Organization of the Muslim community in Canada, published a report alongside the World Sikh Organization looking at, for example, the RSS network. The RSS is an extremist paramilitary organization in India that is the spiritual center of the current governing party, the BJP. They have chapters in Canada, and in the past, the PO police actually inadvertently organized events with them. And so these are the type of things that the policing needs to be acutely aware of. In relation to this, I think the police should really understand the geopolitics involved with what happens here in Peel, and I think the police may not fully appreciate or understand that what happens here is not specifically just a local issue. It's not just a Peel issue. It's an issue that has an impact on geopolitics, and I've already alluded to foreign interference. And there's
You've
other.
hit 5 minutes, Jasker, and I'll let you complete 6 minutes. Go ahead. One more.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. The last point I was going to make here is that things that happen here don't necessarily stay here, and the police has a role not just investigating, but also, quite frankly, to over communicate. It really should look at issues, especially issues around hate crime or potential hate crime in the region, not just against the Sikh community that may have reverberations elsewhere. I'll give you an example of something that the Sikh community has been blamed for is the recent vandalisms of Hindu temples, of mandirs, which is obviously something that is unacceptable. The Ontario Gurdwara Committee, OGC, actually put up a $10,000 reward to find culprits of who was behind it. But those vandalisms were used not just in Canada, but also in India to blame and attack the Sikh community, especially the Sikh community in the diaspora. And I think it's important for police to understand that these vandalisms are not uniquely seen just as an issue locally. And I'll flag one last thing. An example in Brisbane, Queensland, police in Australia, released information as according to a right to information request that suggested in very similar vandalisms, almost identical, that police intelligence believed that it may have actually been at the hand of Hindu nationalists trying to malign the Sikh community. So these types of things need to be understood in a larger geopolitical context. And so when something like this happens, we at the World Sikh Organization are hoping that police can communicate them very openly. Share details. Don't just hide. Don't hold it as far as under investigation and no further comments. That it's important to let details out because Sikh community is sometimes unfairly maligned under different motivations. So
Thank you, Mr.
obviously, there's a lot
Sandu.
of recommendations that we want to make in addition to that around data availability, around again over communicating when something's happening involving hate crime. International students, the pressures they face are very unique. There's a lot of exploitation happening there, and so they're being put into pretty desperate situations. And
Thank you,
then
Mr.
obviously
Sandu.
working with
If I can
communities.
pause you there. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I've been getting bad reception back from you. So I
Okay,
was unclear. I heard background noise, but I wasn't sure what was going on.
no worries. I'll welcome questions from my fellow board members. And yeah, no questions, Mayor. Maybe I can ask a few, Mr. Sandu. My first question is, in our last session, we had some representations from a number of folks talking about Islamophobia, and one of the common threads that was being shared was that even the hate crimes that we're aware are very low representation of what's actually happening, and that for multiple reasons people are afraid or are not reporting these hate crimes, lack of knowledge, etc. Do you think it's similar in the Sikh community?
Yeah, I think it is, especially amongst newer comers to Canada who don't necessarily understand or know their rights. Are also coming in with maybe some suspicions of policing and authority figures in policing. There's research done. Well, there was a poll done in India that found that the Sikh community is the least trusting of policing, and that obviously makes sense when you consider the Sikh genocide and the ongoing violence by the Indian state. And so there's a lot of folks that are experiencing hate and not sharing it for different reasons and different fears. So it is our just from the kind of anecdotally the type of things that are brought to our organization to speak on or to look into. It would be my estimation that there is far more hate crimes or things that maybe should be considered a hate crime happening in the community that are actually reported.
Thank you, Mr. Sandu. With that, I think we can conclude your presentation. And Mayor Crombie, please go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to ask as well. There were a number of recommendations you were beginning to make because you were ended your presentation being a little over time. But I wonder if you could encapsulate, the top 3 or 4 things that you are recommending in a very succinct way, because I did want to give you that opportunity and hear you out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Your Worship, and sorry for going over. 5 minutes is nowhere near enough. But I think the first thing is, data availability. It is tough to find data on hate crimes in general. Nationally, for example, Census Canada doesn't break down hate crimes that impact the Sikh community or the Hindu community or the Buddhist community, for example. So it's really kind of left to local policing to make sure that that data is made very available and freely. And some police departments do better than others. I can't remember off the top of my head if Peel Police already releases it, but I know a lot of forces don't. So that would be something that's useful. I already kind of mentioned on the communications around things involving hate crime. Sometimes it's smart to work with communities and actually talk to them about what are the type of fears or half truths or mistruths or disinformation or misinformation that is circulating in the community surrounding a crime. It makes sense, I think, for police to work with communities to understand what they need to communicate out around something, and that's appreciative that investigations are often ongoing and some things are sensitive. International students, a lot that's kind of happening there where we need ongoing efforts from policing to kind of work with students so they know their rights and responsibilities. On training, making sure that police officers and upper brass are aware and appreciative of kind of what's going on, not just, for example, like the articles of faith and how to treat those when dealing with some of the Sikh community, but also understanding, the geopolitics. We are a community of diasporic communities, and Peel region is that just escalated by magnitudes. It's a community with a lot of folks here building a life for themselves, and a lot of recent immigration. And then the last piece is, and I know the police chief has already made a lot of moves to kind of build upon this, but ensuring that the right organizations and the right folks are sitting at the table, and that there's consistent community outreach and conversation, so that we're not necessarily acting reactively when things happen. That there's a proactive work being done to build almost like an inclusive decision-making model. So these are some of the things that that we believe that the police should to consider as far as recommendations go.
Thank you again for your participation this evening. Sorry, Mayor, was there something else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sandhu, for your participation. We appreciate your time and perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Our next presenter is Asim Malik, who is representing the Muslim Council of Peel. You can come to the front table. There will be 2 mics. You can choose one, and there's a button labeled speak. When it turns red, it means it's on. Thank you. Again, you'll have 5 minutes for the presentation, and I'll give you a warning as you approach it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for having us. We greet you with the greetings of peace and blessings upon all of you. My name is Asim Malik, and as was introduced, I'm here representing the Muslim Council of Peel. I am a board of director at Sayyidah Khadija Center, which our Honorable Madam Mayor knows very well, located in Mississauga. And this organization is a place of worship. It's a mosque, it's a community center, and it is part of the Muslim Council of Peel organization. Our Imam is Dr. Hamid Slimi, who is also the president of MCP, Muslim Council of Peel, pardon the acronyms. And unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, but he does send his regrets, and I hope I can do somewhat of a justice in filling some of the shoes. Pardon me, I have notes here to keep on time, so if I'm not looking up, I apologize for that. Today, I want to focus on really, a lot of times whenever we have the opportunity to speak, sometimes we're going back and forth on Islamophobia, and I appreciate you acknowledging that, and the previous speaker already acknowledging that. Today, I think I want to focus more about human rights and some of the things we can focus on with police governance. Human rights, as we all know, is a fundamental right and freedom which all individuals are entitled to, regardless of who they are or where they come from. They're based on ensuring dignity, equality, and mutual respect of all people. And at the heart of the adequate policing, which is a primary responsibility of this particular Peel Police Board, is the respect for and protection of human rights. Human rights should provide the frame for what policing should strive to achieve and uphold. If this is accomplished, whether it be community policing or traditional law enforcement, Peel Police will be able to ensure that the rule of law is upheld fairly and without violating human rights of residents. So we want to bring about a point about diversity of the police service. A representative police force bridges faith, cultural, and social understanding, facilitating more effective operations and interactions with residents. But diversity is not just about representation. It's about leveraging different perspectives to make policing more comprehensive. While there's commendable progress in increasing diversity in the police force, representation of the Muslim community remains noticeably low. And so we ask ourselves, why do we see less Muslims in the police service? Our perspective is there may be a mistrust or apprehension among Muslims towards the police force, stemming from negative experiences, whether locally or maybe even from countries of origin. In some Muslim communities, policing might not be seen as a preferred profession, perhaps due to historical context or pre-existing biases. Recruitment campaigns may not be effectively reaching or resonating with the Muslim community. In this point, we recommend that Peel Police needs to invest in regular cultural sensitivity and inclusivity training for all officers with specialized modules focusing on the rich diversity of Peel. Allocate additional budget to resources in order to amplify community policing efforts, ensuring officers spend time building relationships within communities they serve. The board last year increased its budget to hire more officers. And again, this may be the same. However, this should be tied to specific allocation of budget to a recruitment campaign in collaboration with community leaders to attract diverse talent, and also through that cultural sensitivity training that we mentioned earlier. Second point, building strong ties between the police leadership and the community leaders. About a year ago, the Peel Police restructured the advisory committee. And that has impacted the effectiveness, in our opinion, of an important platform for community leaders, like Muslim community leaders, to be able to discuss issues with the chief and with the board. We believe this shift has reduced the effectiveness of the original intent. Peel Police has also removed all chaplains except of one faith denomination. This has reduced the representation and voice of diverse communities with the police service, and therefore providing a one-size-fits-all type of interaction with the chaplain services. So we recommend reinstating quarterly meetings between police leaderships and key Muslim community members. Establishing an open door policy where community leaders can express concerns or provide insights. Rethinking the chaplaincy program to allow for different and multiple faith backgrounds that can offer insights into cultural and religious practices, rituals, and beliefs. And my last point here is deepening the engagement of community leaders in police board decisions. The board has developed its policies and engaged in decision-making, sometimes in isolation for many years. It is important to establish a transparent and regular feedback mechanism where community members can share their experiences and concerns regarding policing with the police board. So we recommend engage community leaders, specifically Muslim community leaders, in preliminary discussions when drafting police strategy plans, conducting community surveys to gather feedback on police performance.
1 minute, please.
Thank you. And areas of improvement more directly with the community, whether it be surveys in mosques or through local groups. The board should launch a community advisory committee ensuring representation from all demographics in Peel to act as a bridge between the public and the police board. That's my end of the presentation. I open up for any questions.
Thank you very much. Board members, any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Len. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. Malik. There was something that you referenced that I'm a little bit curious about, and maybe with a little elaboration, and maybe Peel Police Service can also speak to it, is understanding the representation of Muslims within the police service. I'm not so sure how we achieve that, because I can't tell by looking at someone that they are Muslim. And I don't know that our service is gathering that data on its employees to be able to say what number. So when you mention that Muslims are underrepresented within the police service, I'm not sure where that data comes from to support that. And maybe you do have it. I just don't know where it comes from. And how could we, as a service, maybe our officers can speak to that, around how do we know what the religious belief system is of officers to ensure that that is represented within the service?
It's a very, very valid and good question. Thank you for bringing that up. So as I mentioned, I don't want it to be a he said, she said type of thing. So some of it could be, as I mentioned, Muslims not being as inclined to becoming police officers, maybe because of either some sort of cultural or previous experiences, whether locally or whether from countries of origin. It could also be, I think where Peel Police can help is integrating more within places of where Muslims are available, like places of worship, like mosques, and making sure that there is an interaction so we can increase that. When you speak of data, this is obviously our data when we put together different types of professions, and we're noticing that the number of Muslims in the police force is low. Is it every single person that we've asked for? Obviously, some people may not want to declare your faith. As you said, it may not be just written on their face, but this is from what we observed and what we understand. And so we're hoping, again, which was my other point, if we interact more with community leaders so that we have Muslim faith leaders and the police services working together, then I think we can start bridge that gap. We can see, I think, more individuals saying, okay, forget my misconceptions or previous situations or preconceived notions that I've had. I want to enter into the police force, and there's opportunity made for us. Perhaps that's not happening at other levels, but I can't speak to other races or regions or religions, right? Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks for the elaboration.
Mayor Crombie? No? I'll just ask, you touched on outreach, relationship building between the police and the community. And I want to acknowledge that, because I've witnessed this as in my time on the board, that the service does a fair number of approaches and activities to outreach with community. And I've seen it with the Muslim community. Do you have, from your experiences through your mosque, certain outreach initiatives that you find are successful, and others that you find are not really accomplishing the objective that you can share with us?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So definitely having more, if you want to call them fairs or open houses, where in the past police would show up and there would be an open house, people would interact, they would get a presentation, a police cruiser would be outside, the children like to sit in the police cruiser. I feel like it bridges it breaks some of that barrier and stereotypes that at the end of the day, the police, in our opinion, is here to serve the community and to protect the community, right? We shouldn't have to be afraid of the police. We should be able to engage with the police to protect us from the bad guys, if you want to say, right? So this is where I think if we have more of that deep-rooted connection, I believe we had some of that pre-COVID. I know COVID took away from that, but I do recall a lot of those opportunities when we had, like I said, fairs, and we had opportunities where police would come to our premises and interact with our children, interact with the youth, interact with seniors, and hopefully, that starts to break down any barriers, if there are any, and break down any misconceived notions or prejudices.
I'll just offer a reflection. I find it really interesting how you touched on budget, because that's certainly something in the realm of the board. And we generally, when we talk budget, it comes down to how many more officers do we add. And what you're suggesting is we look at budget and maybe even go a little deeper and say the board needs to designate certain budget to certain priorities. In your case, you're saying the priority is diversification, recruitment. So I find that very interesting, and thank you for that comment. It resonates with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and also in addition to that, and the training that goes with it, having cultural sensitive training, so that it's one thing to have diversity, but if there's no training on that, then it becomes even more challenging for that interaction to happen.
Thank you so much. I really apologize. I've been stuck in traffic, but I'm here now. And so Mr. C. Malik, thank you so much for your remarks. I wanted to open it up to, you just finished? Oh, excellent. Wow. Okay. Well, then on my behalf, thank you so much for being here today, and we appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Sukaina Dada, Executive Director of Smile Canada. Thank you, Ahmed. So there's just a speak button at the front. Just press the red button. No.
Can you hear me? Okay. And we can ditch the doctor.
Just want to let you know you have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. So I'm here representing an organization called Smile Canada Support Services. We are an organization that supports racialized children with disabilities and their families, primarily from Muslim identifying communities, with a strong focus on newcomers. Majority of our families reside here in Peel. And we've had a lot of families who've had really negative interactions with police, with individuals from Peel Police Services, and that's exactly why I'm here today, and I hope to share some recommendations with you. While recent strategies put forth by police services, they do, support the rights of disabled persons, including the autism strategy that recently came out. One of the things is it's a step in the right direction, but we are recognizing the critical need for an intersectional lens that includes supporting racialized communities as well as newcomers, those who are facing oppressions of ableism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and racism. The key to intersectionality is that we cannot separate our social locations. And so, just like we can't say all women We also can't say all disabled persons. It doesn't work. We also know that with racialized communities, with the communities that we're working with at SMILE, that there are certain social determinants of health and disability that are overlapping with their intersectionalities that we also cannot separate. And these are leading to more and more families who are underserved, underrepresented, and truthfully, they're putting really, really difficult positions. So instead of a general strategy, what we need is to look at who is overlooked, who is underserved, and who is underrepresented. I'm going to share an example, and this is of somebody who I've worked with for a number of years in my role at SMILE. And of course, I'll omit names for this setting. But this is a young man who has a diagnosis of autism. He is a racialized person. He is a person with dark skin. He's got a scruffy beard. And he comes from the Muslim community. And he has autism. He's nonverbal. In the past few years, he's had over 20 interactions with Peel Police. And I'll share just very briefly, he goes for long walks in his neighborhood, long walks, hours walking. He takes it all in, as many of us would like to do. He watches every snowflake and smells every flower. And oftentimes he gets called that there's some suspicious activity, or that, somebody's loitering, or that he seems unsafe to himself or maybe the people around him. And we understand that the police respond to every call. And so, with this young man, he has been handcuffed. He has been placed face first on the ground. He's even been driven to the hospital, but he's actually not ill. He has autism, right? There's no need for a hospital. And I mentioned he's never been arrested. He's also never even been given a ticket. Now, while we know that officers are responding to the call, when, we know that when approached, he's not going to answer the question, "What is your name?" But he will respond to, "Point me to your house." Or he will respond to, show me your name. If he has an identification card, which he always does on his person. Time and time again, because these incidents, unfortunately, have continued to happen, time and time again, his parents ask, is it that he has autism and has certain behaviors? Or is it the scruffy beard? Or is it the dark skin? Or is it all of it? And that brings us to this concept of intersectionality. That, the strategies that we're looking at, does it apply to this young man? So I just want to quickly sum up a few recommendations. And the first one is communication. I've mentioned we're in communication with several police officers, but they've always been in response to an urgent incident, or the urgency is around the incident. Something happened to somebody in the community, and then when we respond. The families that I work with, prevention is urgent. They want to make sure that there is no incident where he gets frustrated, it's been too many times, and he pushes back or he resists. The second is around education. I'm finding that intersectionality, the conversations on culturally responsiveness, and conversations on even equity, they're almost part of the phase 2 of the strategies. And I'm not pinning on any strategy, but in general, that we have almost like a overall strategy, and then we have a part 2 that would address intersectionalities. Furthermore, on the topic of disability, moving from this biomedical model to the social justice, human rights, and the social model. What does that mean? It would change the question when someone has autism from, are they nonverbal because they are autistic, to, are they comprehending what I'm saying? Am I sharing information in a way that they understand? Because a person may not be verbal for many reasons. They might have a developmental disability. They might have a hearing impairment. They might have experienced a trauma and are facing something like selective mutism. They might be having social anxiety, or they might not speak English. And I think it's really important for us to, instead of identifying that this person might have this, to overall look at that person as a whole and say, how is it that there are these barriers? Finally, the last piece is community engagement. I was part of a roundtable from the community that I'm a part of before coming here a few weeks ago, and communities, the families that we're working with do not feel safe. There have been too many incidents. So I wanted to use this platform to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to open up to the board if anybody had any questions. Amaratia?
Thank you for the presentation. I have many questions, but I'll try to focus here. I got to acknowledge that, there have been a number of incidents in Peel that have triggered, the service to take an active approach to changing. And there's certainly a spirit of change in our leadership in the service. And, one case resulted in a huge thought process in the service around mental health, and a mental health strategy was implemented. More recently, the case of Mr. Darwich, which was autism, and that triggered the service to realize that there is need for more nuance, and is working on a autism strategy. And I think one of the just not necessarily, I'm not involved in these exercises, but because we're reacting and we're trying to fix it real fast, we may not be understanding the situation necessarily in the details that's required, and engaging with all the right people. I asked someone last time who presented on the area of disability rights as well, that, in developing these strategies, what organizations are available in your space, in your sector, that could work with the police service on this education piece? They may already be working with groups, but but generally, whether it's SMILE, are there others who can be experts to work with the service on the strategy?
It's an excellent question. And I think, to just very briefly say that I think it's the communities or the organizations that are working with the people, that are working alongside the people. There are many organizations that support persons with disabilities, but many of them are not actually interacting with newcomer families. Many of them are not interacting with, for example, like Muslim families or, racialized families. And I think the difficulty becomes is that when, we're collecting these perhaps mainstream organizations that are doing excellent work and providing critical information on autism and other disabilities and training, what happens is when we leave out people who are with members of these communities, their voices get left out. And I feel like that's what's happening at SMILE, and I know with organizations that I work with, it's the same thing, whether they're Black-led organizations or organizations that support predominantly South Asian families. Like, I think the main thing is that there are organizations that exist, but they have to also be part of the conversation and in a preventative way.
So you're saying that within these spaces, we need to dig a little deeper and look at the intersectionality and particular communities and work with different segments to get it right, I think is what I'm hearing. Okay, my next question is 15 calls, one individual. I'm sure there's many factors that go into this, and I understand why these calls are made by community members who, you explain that. And I understand that police officers, hopefully one day will be trained to recognize symptoms or, signals to understand that this individual might be autistic. But beyond training, community awareness, are you aware whether there's like law enforcement policies in the way that we deal with a 911 call that that are factoring into how an individual who has autism is dealt with, arrested, taken to a hospital, that are, I don't know, the term is maybe blind to the fact that the nuance of a person's health condition?
So that question came about quite a lot during these different conversations that we've had now over the course of 2 years. And like I mentioned, even when we started the conversations, we've actually the families received a few, there were a few more incidents. And part of it is that this concept of non-compliance or this concept of, aggressive behavior, if we just look at somebody is not complying or somebody is resisting or somebody, we have to ask ourselves, are they, or is it that they don't understand? And in the case of this individual, when asked, what is your name? Or where are you? And all these verbal commands, the individual does not respond. There's no way to get the individual to respond. If we shift the way we're asking, or if we shift how we're asking by not even asking verbally, even just doing a gesture, we will get to a better result. And so I think what we need to have is, and we've asked a little bit about policy around how do you handle situation. And to be honest, it's really come down to each officer makes that individual decision based off of their own expertise and experience, and of course, what they've been trained to do. And so even if this individual were to share a few words verbally, those few words might not make sense to the officer, and it might come across as the individual is making fun or the individual is resisting, when really it's just somebody who's walking, right? And at the end of the day, in this particular situation, everybody across the board has come to the conclusion that the individual is not at fault. Yet over 20 times, it's too much.
So let me just wrap up with one quick question. In Peel Region, we have something called situation tables, where the Peel Police is a member at that table, and it's designed to identify individuals who have a large number of calls or interactions with the police to rethink, what are the source or root issues. Has Smile ever heard of this or been engaged in this process or received a client because of this?
So we've not received a client because of this. We've heard of this process, and I think I mentioned in my talk that we've been engaged in some of these conversations. We hear a lot we're involved a lot when the situation is urgent. Once those weeks and months go by, the communication seems to kind of dwindle off. And so that's my hope in the recommendation, is that there is consistent communication from both ends. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your presentation today. We appreciate you coming down. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Ron Cunningham, CEO of Citizens for the Advancement of Community Development. Hello, Mr. Cunningham, just in the front. Thank you. Just a reminder, you have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when 1 minute warning. Thank you, sir.
Sure, thank you. Madam Mayor, good to see you. Chair of the Peel Police Service Board, members, our Deputy Chief of Police and our Chief of Police. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here essentially to discuss how human rights influence the current police governance, how human rights are cornerstone of democratic society, and their protection and promotions are essential to maintaining a just and equitable society. This is the framework, and for me today, I want to show how we can build relationships between law enforcement with the input of human rights and how it actually impacts at-risk youth. And I'm particularly a bit concerned about at-risk youth because that's the segment of our society that my organization, CACD, focuses on. Furthermore, this presentation aims to shed light on critical role of human rights in shaping police behavior and the importance of protecting the rights of at-risk youth, as I noted before. And this is something that we at CACD, the organization for which I lead, is particularly interested in. And we have even tried in numerous occasions to build relationship with the police. And so far, we have had a wonderful relationship going to this point. Now, before I address the key topic, which is how do human rights factor into current police governance framework, let me set the stage with a couple of definitions that will help us as we look at this issue of human rights within the police board and how it impacts at-risk youth. At-risk youth is a term used to describe young individuals who are more likely to encounter negative outcomes or challenges in their lives due to various risk factors. These youth may be more vulnerable to issues such as involvement in criminal activity, dropping out of school, substance abuse, mental health challenges. It is important to note that the term at-risk youth is broad and can encompass a diverse range of background and circumstances. Human rights framework for policing is essentially to ensure that law enforcement agencies uphold and respect all individuals' fundamental rights and dignity, including at-risk youth. The framework is rooted in the international and domestic laws, conventions, principles that guide police behavior and interaction with the public. To clarify somewhat human rights, let me say that human rights are fundamental rights and freedoms inherent in all individuals. They encompasses civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, is a foundational document. And these are the kind of stuff that we believe is paramount for the police as they build relationship. Now, first, human rights help unfold the rule of law. They provide a legal and moral framework within which law enforcement agency must operate. Secondly, human rights ensure accountability and transparency. They hold the police accountable for their action and require them to operate openly and transparently. These are some of the challenges we find in our community, the Black community, where people question if these are truly upheld. Now, thirdly, they protect citizens from abuse of power by those in authority, including
Sorry to interrupt, sir. You have 1 minute. Thank you.
law enforcement. Now, I'd like to jump quickly to current police framework. Police governance framework varies across countries, but they typically include legislation, regulation, oversight bodies responsible for holding law enforcement agencies accountable. These frameworks set the legal and operational parameter within which police operate. And from our perspective, these are key things that we would like to see more of or get the opportunity to be involved in discussions that brings out these elements of human rights. I would just like to jump to some strategies for human rights and to address these challenges and ensure human rights are fully integrated into policing. Several strategies can be implemented. One, training and education, and that's something that we have heard mentioned before. Accountability mechanism, community engagement, which I could say for sure we have seen improvement in those areas, but still more need to be done. Legal reform, and then of course there's the international standards where international human rights treaties and conventions which provide global framework for which we can adapt here in Peel.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm going to turn it over to my fellow board members if anybody had any questions. Perfect. Oh, did you want to? Maybe I'll turn over then Carby first.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham, for the presentation and for focusing on, of course, the specific segment of the population which you work very closely with. I had the opportunity of working with you on some of those initiatives over the years that you have been doing this. And I want to just zero in on something that you said earlier about building a good relationship with police in doing some of the work you have done. Is there any specific recommendations or strategies that you have used to help build that relationship with our police service that has brought you the kind of success? Because I wonder if there are other organizations such as yours that could benefit from some of the strategies you have used to build that relationship. And secondly, any specific strategies for Peel Police in working with at-risk youth that you could recommend to add to the discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Carby. Indeed, we try to be proactive in terms of understanding the need that our at-risk youth, have and are experiencing. And in that way, we have a pretty good idea of what you're going through. And then we reach out to the police. We do not wait for the police to come. We reach out to the police. I'm just suggesting that other organization could be as forthright as we were in doing that. We have also taken students to the police to, address various issues that they have been experiencing. And we find it to be very meaningful. The police have always been very receptive. Recently, we went to the DMU unit, and we had an excellent opportunity to talk about the issues that these youth are facing, and right there ask the police what they can do. And I can assure you that just recently I was invited by the Peel Police to participate in some school supply giveaway. And that clearly shows that, Peel Police is reciprocating and taking steps to meet with the community. And it wasn't just CACD that was there. There were many other organizations. And these kind of items, we are able to distribute among those youth that are at risk. And they come to know where it's coming from. And that's not the only thing we have done. On a yearly basis, we try to arrange, activity with Peel Police in terms of a basketball tournament. And we find that to be very meaningful. So those are simple things where the police gets involved with the community and we build a relationship in that regard. And I might mention just one other point that we do. We look at, we serve youth age 10 to 24, middle school, high school, and post-secondary. And we have invited Peel Police to present to these students from time to time. So they get the opportunity of hearing what the Peel Police is doing and changes that are taking place. And I believe that is quite meaningful in building relations. And I could go on to another, which you were also involved in, Mr. Carby, is our community forum. And we made sure that Peel Police was present to convey their ideas about the issues of racism, discrimination, hate crime, etc. So it's a way of stepping out. Do not just wait on the police, but get out there. They are busy people. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I just feel that community organizations need to do more of that, take the step to move forward and to reach the police pathway.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Carby. Mayor Crombie, I believe you had questions.
Well, let me just first thank Ron, and thank you for coming. Great to see you, and thank you for all the great work you do with at-risk kids in Mississauga. And just building on what Len has already asked, what is the trust factor like with the kids you interact with our PRP? Is there confidence in police? Do they feel comfortable? And secondly, do we ever speak to them about potential careers in policing?
Indeed, Madam Mayor, in terms of the career path, that is something that we have launched and have tried to reach out to a number of these at-risk youth. I might have just maybe one negative for Peel Police, in that we have reached out to them regarding two individuals who were interested, and they got back to me that they did not hear anything from them, that type of a thing. I was a little bit disappointed, and I had promised that I would follow up with, his name slipped my mind, my good old friend, Andrew Cooper, but wasn't able to make that connection. And so there were two black kids, and there was, sorry, in fact, there was two black kids, and there was one from the Middle East. His background is Middle Eastern. And I think it was kind of a missed opportunity. I'm not saying they would necessarily get in, but just the follow-up never took place. And for that reason, we, was a little bit concerned about that. But at the same time, I must say that just by talking to various officers, there is the willingness and the desire to work in that way. But maybe we need to see more concrete action, to bring in. There was a second part to your question, I think.
It was the trust.
The trust. I think it's improving. Like for the kids that we work with, taking them to the police station and having them asking questions, having the police addressing, workshops, talking about what police are doing to improve relationship. Again, the basketball game, and we're doing this now on a regular basis, on a yearly basis. So all these, I think, are leading to greater trust. And apart from that, what the police are doing in the DMU, I, for one, is very excited about it. I remember years ago, I was very outspoken about community-based policing, that I even got a commendation from Chief Blair for my effort. I even brought police commissioner from Jamaica to meet Mayor Crombie and also Chief Blair and Peter Slowly here. So it was something, and take police officer from Able to Jamaica to run community-based policing workshop. So it's something that I feel very strong about, and I can see the action and activities within the DMU that's simulating those things. So for me personally, I like what I'm seeing. I just want it to be more extensive. Got to be more out there to the various facets of it.
Thank you. Maybe we can get commitment that we can get someone to follow up with some of those youths that may have been interested in a career. Thank you. You got it behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Crombie. Amiratia?
I'll just ask one last question. Last month, we had a presentation by a gentleman representing concerns of the Black community, and his topic was focused on the issue of racial profiling. And from a board perspective, I've been on the board for now 4+ years, and I have witnessed that we, at a top level, through policy, through changes in our approach, through training, we have made significant progress around issues like racial profiling. As you know, carding has been canceled for years now, and the data is showing that there are improvements in that space. And so my question to you, though, because he focused on it as an ongoing concern, with the youth that you work with, have you, in more recent years, experienced, or have they experienced, practices that would be considered racial profiling?
It's a tough question to answer in the sense that it's mixed. The feedback is mixed. We work with some students at Peel Youth Village, and sometimes you go there and talk to those kids. They speak of, these kind of issues. And of course, I don't know if it's what exists presently, or because it's something that was there for years, that they just continue to talk about it. But from my personal experience, and particularly those that we serve, I definitely think there are improvement. But you see it in the news just the same, things happening in Toronto, so it's out there. My take is, we know that it's happening in some cases, We know what needs to be done, so we should just roll on, roll our sleeves up, and get it going. And that's my take.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cunningham, for coming and sharing your presentation today. Definitely very valuable for all of us, all your thoughts. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
So should I just- Okay, so we're just gonna, next presenter is Bayan Khatib from Syrian Canadian Foundation. Oh, perfect. Hi, welcome. Just in the front there, and I believe your mic's already on, so. And just a reminder, you have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when it's a 1-minute warning. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today. We definitely really appreciate the police's interest in hearing from the community. My name is Bayan Khatib. I am the co-founder of the Syrian Canadian Foundation, a charity that started here in Mississauga to support Syrian refugees that were arriving almost 8 years ago now, but now working with diverse communities and refugees from all over. My full-time job currently is at the North Pine Foundation, which is a philanthropy foundation focused on making investments for better outcomes for refugees across Canada. And a little bit about me, my family came here as refugees over 30 years ago from Syria. I grew up here in the Toronto and Mississauga area. And I wanted to start today with asking us to reflect a little bit on what it means to be a refugee. Unfortunately, the narrative out there is troubling. And so it's really important for us to remember that nobody chooses to be a refugee. It is something horrible that happens to you and your family due to war, due to terrible dictatorships, due to climate change, which we're going to see more and more of as time goes by. And so I think the first thing to do is to treat refugees with a whole lot of compassion. They have gone through very long, difficult journeys of loss and suffering and heartbreak. And when they come here, sometimes it takes a while to settle in and understand a new culture and a new place. And there's a lot of room for us to have compassion for that and how we deal with them. Another thing to remember is that refugees often come from countries where the police are the bad guys, deeply corrupt, very unjust, terrifying. And so when they come here, it's not like from the refugees I've spoken with, they don't suddenly have a completely different perspective, right? Especially, I mean, the Syrian Canadian Foundation and other organizations I have volunteered with have run programming for refugees at risk who have gotten in trouble with the law. And so a lot of this information that I'm going to talk about today actually comes from checking in with them on how they feel and what's going on with them. And so they actually feel like the police they have a lot of mistrust with the police, and they feel like the police have a lot of stereotypes about them and their people, and a lot of targeting and racial profiling. These are things that you hear from these youth at risk. So again, it might not reflect all refugee populations, but the youth, that's what they were saying. And in fact, one of these organizations got some funding to run a program for youth at risk and organized an activity for inviting the police to come and inviting the youth to try to create that connection. And the youth actually refused to show up because they didn't want to interact with the police. And so that tells me that we need to do work at a higher level than that first direct community engagement. There's trust building that has to happen on a more systemic level before they're ready to directly engage. I think that, I don't know how much time I have left. I haven't been keeping track, but there's a very important point that I want to relay and that I hear from a lot of refugee families, which is, 2 minutes, which is about refugee families want to be treated as a unit. And a lot of times when there's police engagement, or even if one family member calls the police on another family member, they still want to be treated as a family unit. I'll give you one story. A young woman who was having a terrible panic attack and was scared that, you know, she was going to die. She called the police. They came to the family, and the dad was very worried about his daughter. So he was kind of like hovering over her, trying to make sure she's okay. And the police were really, according to him, spoke very rudely and told him to stay away and move away. And she's over 18, and, you know, they wanted to speak with her directly, but she wasn't even in a position to speak. She was like fainting and stuff. And so he felt really disrespected as her father. And there wasn't that respect for the family unit. There wasn't, you know, and like many refugees come from very collective cultures, not highly individualistic cultures. And so this idea of like, step away, we're talking to the individual, is very culturally insensitive. And so there's a lot that, a lot of like cultural sensitivity that would be very, very helpful. And important to mention too that Toronto is one of the largest ports of entries for refugees, and many of them end up in Mississauga as well as Scarborough. And so if there's anywhere in the country where the police force should invest in culturally sensitive training, trauma-informed training, it is here in Peel Region. Also a little bit about diversity hiring. We talk about that as well as like, oh, we wish the police would hire more diverse people. But again, because there's a lot of mistrust, a lot of the youth were like, you know, even if they thought about it, they feel like, oh, but the community might actually look down on you because you're going to go work for those people that target us, those people that have stereotypes against us. So we have to do the work at a higher level of that systemic change before we can do that direct engagement. I guess I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. I do have a question, but I'd like to turn it over first to, so Mayor Crombie, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Bayan. And of course, we know each other very well, and we were interacting at the time where Syrian refugees were incoming and fluxing to Peel Region, particularly to Mississauga. But now we see different asylum seekers. You know, the Ukrainians came and were fairly well integrated, although their hotel stays were very long, I'll let you know. But now a little more integrated. And now we see East African. And they're fleeing because of repressive laws in Nigeria, Kenya, etc. And I wonder if you're having to interact with them and, you know, what issues they're facing. And sorry to make this about the refugees rather than policing, but it's important because what you said to us, I think, it's true of many cultures. I even found it true, you know, as a politician knocking on doors, you will meet people who are from Middle East or even China, Asian countries that say, you know, they're very fearful of police because of their experience back in their home country. So what you said was very accurate, and it doesn't apply to asylum seekers, but to many who have immigrated here to Canada.
I think the important thing to remember is that with the asylum seekers coming in bigger numbers and all other refugee communities is that when people's very basic important needs are met, they are better able to integrate into society effectively, right? So right now we know that there's a housing crisis, there's a healthcare crisis. It's impossible to find a family doctor and the healthcare that you need, a mental health crisis. So all those things are all interlinked together.
Right.
And if we can work to help work on all of those things together, then we will find a lot less engagement with the police, a lot less need for that. One of my favorite phrases that I learned from my colleague Sarah, who runs our formerly incarcerated portfolio at North Pine, is hurt people. And we have to take responsibility as a society for part of that. It's not the individual's fault only.
It breaks my heart when I'm observing the welcoming that the new asylum seekers are receiving today, because our shelters are 300% capacity. The cities don't have the funding, and there's some loophole that until they've actually been declared asylum seeker, they're basically regarded as homeless, and you know the city's responsibilities, and we don't have the capacity or resources to. So we're all finding it here at Peel Region very troubling. You know, it's just not the way we want to welcome people who are fleeing from repressive conditions and fleeing for their safety and security. So I can certainly understand. And then, so often there, police are called even to the shelters for assistance, and then they recoil as well. So it's not been ideal, and I thank you for bringing this lived experience. I'll see if my other colleagues have any further questions, but know that we're here to help and support.
Thank you, Mayor Crombie. Ahmed Atia.
Thank you, Ms. Khatib, for presenting today. We talk human rights at the board, and we tend to think, anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, and other types, anti-Semitism. But, it's been really interesting today. We're hearing autism, and now this lens of refugees is just opens your eyes to how broad human rights is. One of the things we heard last month from an executive from a food bank was the nexus between food security and interactions with police. And so in that concept, can you give us a perspective, whether supported by data or just by your experiences or lived experiences of people you deal with, on, when refugees come here, obviously there's challenges to settlement, right, and resources. And so, do you see a nexus between those challenges and seeing youth then falling into crime or interactions with police more often than not because of that? Can you give us some perspective?
Yeah, so like I said, it's when people's basic needs aren't met, when they are not feeling well, when you have refugees coming from war zones with PTSD, they don't make the best decisions. And that's not just refugees, that's all of us. When we are not well, we do not make good decisions and we get into trouble. And then that creates a vicious cycle that spirals out of control at times. And so it's really important to come at this at the root issue of it, which is like these people are coming here from very difficult circumstances, and they have a lot of needs and that, all at once. So it's a lot on the community, but also the government has to take like when we're bringing government-sponsored refugees here, every single time it winds up feeling like an emergency where we don't know what we're doing. But there's like a constant flow of refugees now. We can't be shocked by this every single time. Like we need to have proper community support set up. And it's in everybody's best interest. It's when we support them effectively, that's going to create better outcomes for the whole community. And they much faster, much more quickly become contributing members to the community, as opposed to, people who are either getting into trouble or need more of our support. So we have to see it as an investment and really think about the holistic need of a person.
Do you think the interaction with the police officer and the police system considers for the fact that these challenges that refugees go through, in your experiences of youth or others who have interacted?
So, I don't have expansive experience on this. It's just what I hear from the youth that we work with. I think that, it would be great if the police had more trauma-informed, response, culturally sensitive, got a lot more training about what is it like to, to work with people from different cultures, people who are coming here with all sorts of trauma, right? So from what I hear, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on that front.
My final question, do you think, with refugees, one of the most obvious barriers they have is language?
Mm-hmm.
And I know as a board member, I've had multiple times where a refugee has been in trouble or interacted with police, and someone in the community calls me and says, like, just forget the interaction itself. Do you know a lawyer who speaks Arabic? And I'm like, and it's really hard for me to figure out or find one, right? And when I do, there are a select few. So do you think language barriers disadvantage refugees in their interactions with police, whether in the moment in that interaction or the arrest or the court system?
I think language barrier is the #1 barrier on every front for refugees and newcomers, whether it's engagement with police or getting healthcare at the hospital or dealing with their kids' schools. Language is the #1 barrier, and unfortunately, the state of language training in our province is absolutely terrible. This is off topic, but very passionate about this topic. The ESL classes that we have just aren't suitable for everybody, and people are just not moving. They're just not learning English. So something needs to be done different. But also, I think interpretation is their right. Like, when you go to the hospital, they're supposed to provide interpretation services, and an engagement with the police might be the scariest thing that happens to a person. It's terrifying. I mean, I grew up here, and I would still be terrified when a police stops me. So I think not being provided interpretation service is going to lead to very poor outcomes, way worse outcomes. Because when you're scared, like I said, when you're scared, you make worse decisions, and so we want to alleviate that as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lancarby.
Good evening, Ms. Kati. Thanks for sharing. I'm reflecting on the various differences that have been identified in our community, our diverse community, whether it is language, disability, gender, religion, education, now refugee status. And a police officer going out interacting with someone in the community has to navigate all of these things and figure out what is unique around with this particular person, to change the way they respond based on that person's unique situation. So I can imagine how challenging that would be. But this table gives us the opportunity to hear and to learn. And so I certainly also want to appreciate the fact that we have here the chief and 4 other deputy chiefs listening to this conversation, to help inform some of the changes which are happening within the service, to help meet the challenges that officers are facing. I was at a graduation service program just last week where there were 51 new officers, and among them, there were 15 different languages. That's part of the effort in recruiting diverse individuals to the service to meet some of these challenges. And I've heard language as one of the challenges. So the question that I have is, are there any tables that you are sitting at that allows you to get feedback from the police service around the changes that are happening within the service, to address some of the concerns that you have? Because I fear that sometimes we have these roundtables, which are fantastic, and we get feedback, but then if you leave and there is no continual process of dialogue, you are not aware of what changes may be happening. And so I was just wondering if there's a place for us to lean into more communication between groups like yours and others who are presenting around constant feedback in response to the changes that you're asking for.
Yeah, so first of all, I have a lot of sympathy for the police because, like you said, it's very, very challenging. There's so many fronts to deal with all at once. I know it's very difficult. And then in terms of the second part of your question, I know that the police is doing a lot of community engagement. When I was at my time at the Syrian Canadian Foundation, the Toronto police had reached out to us for a variety of things. And as I was leaving, Peel Police had reached out to us as well. And I've heard some good things, but I'll tell you the negative feedback because it might be a little bit more useful. So there was a youth council that Peel Police created, and they invited one of the refugee youth that was a volunteer with us to participate in it. They actually asked us to recommend someone, and we recommended her. So she said that she felt that the council really didn't accommodate her at all. Like the meetings would be, at times she completely wasn't available and couldn't come. Like it might have been during the day when she's a student or something like that, where it made no sense. And then even if whenever she tried to voice anything, she didn't feel heard. And she felt like it was kind of procedural, like they just wanted to do this because they need to do it. And she didn't feel like there was like a sincere effort to listen to her voice. This is one person's experience. So I think that, there have been efforts to reach out to, I know the Syrian Canadian Foundation is also doing something. There's someone participating in some sort of table as well, happening in the next few weeks, actually. But I think that these engagements should also be with people with lived experience. So that's kind of the best way, because hearing it, directly from those people is probably best. But it's also important to keep in mind that one person's experience of feeling like this was just done for procedural purposes and not sincerely here to listen to my voice.
Awesome, thank you. What I'm hearing is opportunity to create more conversation and dialogue. So thanks for coming, because I think you have highlighted another area, another perspective from which we should be at least looking at some of these challenges. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Khalid Al-Kazaz from the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Khalid. Thank you. Just right here in the front. And I believe your mic's already on. I just wanted to let you know you had 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when it's 1 minute. Thank you so much, sir.
I get this all the time.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
sitting back, it was tough to me to find the position because I find it very uncomfortable giving people my back. So I apologize
Oh,
for those on the back. And I start by thanking yourself, Ms. Soli, and Mayor Crombie, and the police chiefs, and everybody in the room for giving us this opportunity to share some of our experiences with this topic of online hate or combating online hate. I believe I have a presentation, but they have to press start. So my name is Khalid Al-Qazaz, and I have some experiences. I currently am the director of the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council, where we basically work on structural Islamophobia and working on policy, changing policy that affects racism and Islamophobia. My other hat relates to education technology consulting, and I do this through a couple of engineering and education firms. And some of the work that I've been involved with revolves around the use of artificial intelligence. So I'll get straight into the presentation. This works. Yep. Good. So the topic of online hate is not new to anybody. It's just the depth and the experiences that people go through that impacts their engagement with online hate. And I pulled a few comments from a very beneficial document that a UN committee has established as a consultation on online hate and combating online hate. And I can share this with the committee. I actually sent it on the email earlier this morning. So basically, they acknowledge that social media has become a primary vehicle to spread hate speech in an unprecedented speed and reach. The platforms operate feeds on hateful and discriminatory content and provides echo chambers for such narratives, leading to real-world harm. And in Canada, we've seen some incidents, and so these are incidents that affected people, and these incidents involve identity-based violence instigated through online hate. The most recent is, if you're following the trial of the attacker or the murderer of the Afzal family in London, where he clearly said that he was inspired by the Christchurch Manifesto and murders there, and he would like for what he has done to be also an inspiration to others. So it is not something that is distant, far. It is actually affecting people among us and around us, and could impact everybody here. So these are real incidents. Going more into online hate. So again, what kind of things I'm talking about with regards to online hate? The first is related to the content itself. So there is hate online, where you go into platforms and discussions and media sources where there is dehumanizing content, hate campaigns against individuals and groups. So the hate is actually manifests itself online. And we've seen some of those campaigns, and we've seen in courts those campaigns, and several members of our community, the Muslim community here, has actually gone into litigation against people who have promoted hate here in Canada as well. And then the second is the growth of these online hate into not just content, but networks of individuals. So you have hate groups online, and a whole industry that produces fake content, manipulation of images, and use of Twitter bots to promote messages such as Islam is an imminent threat to Western society. And there's a whole website that I also have linked here that talks about this kind of media manipulation and online hate. And I pulled also from the report by the Peel Police Board in May of this year that there is a almost 7% increase of hate-motivated crimes, even though it's lower than the national average of 27%, but it's still an increase in reported and documented hate crimes. So it is not an issue that we have managed to resolve. It's an issue that still exists and growing. And then the escalation of this is when also hate crimes or hate promotion goes beyond the offline space. So it goes to where people can enact on these incidents. And you see two versions. One version where individuals act individually and they go do incidents like the Quebec shooting or the Quebec mosque shooting or the incident in London. And or you also see groups that start to organize and mobilize and actually beyond online. So they're present, and we started to see more manifestation of this in public demonstrations of hate. Okay, so how can technology help? And I've grouped them into three main categories, and I will share some examples that I've been involved with that the technology can be used to do this. So basically, artificial intelligence has a whole section that deals with something called natural language understanding. So basically, that the computer eventually understand what is this content doing, or what is this content about, and can be able to organize, analyze, and make it easier for decision makers to make decisions. So this whole swath of technology that relates to understanding content is the primary drive for everything that comes after here. So the first is, it is very difficult for individuals to monitor online hate, and because this is too much content all over, groups, websites, video content, and so on. So the first use is basically monitoring online hate content, and that's one area where AI can be used to collect and make it easier to monitor what is happening online as it relates to hate. Second is tracking online hate networks. So that's another thing that technology was able to provide, is to use the data that is available in the public, connect, make relationships, and get you on social media platforms and get you more understanding of these hate networks. And then another interesting area, which is the predictive and assessing risky behavior based on people's profiles and what they do online. So of course I had several examples. This is the example of the monitoring tool and software that collects and can be filtered and gone through. This is one that deals with influencers, people who have influence.
My apologies for interrupting. You're at time. If you wanted to maybe give a closing remark.
Yes, so my closing remark is about the consideration. And the consideration here is balancing these safety concerns with the infringements of rights of free expression and privacy. Additional consideration should be made for cultural and religious sensitivity. And then finally, proper oversight and redress, a mechanism to avoid misuse and overreach of such tools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have some questions. So I believe Mayor Crombie, you had a question?
Yes, I've seen those ads. If you could put them back and tell me what the point was and how they're infiltrating hate there, especially on this. Yeah, can you speak to this one, please?
Okay, so there are several tools that allows you to do monitoring. The key here is that these tools are not just, the AI tools are not only based on tag words and indexed words or like, it's not just capture, because even when you start to use tags and index words, you start to get so much information that is very difficult for you to capture. The more intelligent tools now groups this information and makes it easier for you and presents it on a dashboard like this one, where you can also put measures of sensitivity, or like you can put a measure for what you define as hate, and start to get a tool to basically help you make decisions and collect. This tool actually collects data continuously from Twitter feeds and from over 200 website channels that can be expanded to other social media platforms, as well as chat groups where hate is actually prevailing as well. So that's one. The second one here, basically, in these networks that we identify of individuals or different groups, in this case, this was more on a commercial application, but it can be extended to hate networks. It defines the domain of influence and impact of those individuals on others. So is this person like connected to others? Is this person impacting and either impacting or being impacted or influenced by others as well? And then what kind of assistance does this person, we can identify if they're state sponsored or if they have automated bots that can impact campaigns that they can produce and interject. Another utility could also be related to fact checking and making sure that what we have is actually accurate and not just hoax and obnoxious campaigns. And then this is an example of and this would require a little bit more time, but maybe we can do it later. So this was a graph that was plotted on these on the relationships on the impact of on the Democratic and liberal Republican and the Democrat Party in the U.S. With the influence from different Gulf countries. So who are then influential individuals? Who are the networks that are moving in this direction or that direction? And what kind of balance they have and so on. So if you can transpose this and work it through hate networks, you will also be able to identify which media outlets are sympathetic, which connectors connect between different communities and so on.
Mr. Len Carby?
Thank you so much. This is actually an area that intrigues me quite a bit because of my background in technology many years ago. But just before actually coming in, a couple of us were talking behind the scenes around the gap that exists between the legislation and the technology. So technology is a fantastic tool, but in the context of our presentation here this evening, we're talking about policing. I wonder if you have any knowledge in, and your expertise, because one of the slides you brought up was around the considerations that you could speak to. What is your understanding around what the police are able to use? Are you using data here that is just publicly available and can be used? Because you also raised the concern about the collection and use of that data. And this is now the police that you're saying can use that data. So is there legislation in place that would allow for the protection of individuals or allows the police to be able to access such data and use that in the way you're speaking? Or do we need to be working with our legislators to catch up with the legislation?
So this is an excellent question in many ways, and because I also have an arm and a leg in the human rights space, this is a very important consideration. Actually, there is a report that I'm citing here by the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group around limiting the use of AI in policing. So they have outlined clearly what are the concerns, the issues, and so on. And also coming from a visible minority group, one concern when I actually mention this topic is that this might be used against us as a minority community. So these are valid concerns, and this is why I put this slide to balance things out clearly. On the point on the rights that we're talking about here is that basically there are two key rights: the rights to privacy and to freedom of expression. And then coming from the human rights background, these are basically red lines that policing communities, and us as a community should not infringe, or we really move in the wrong direction. So the good thing about the tools that I have mentioned, and this is the direction that I recommend, and that is basically we entirely use public data. So we're not going into people's accounts, or these are the publicly available data, and the algorithms collect from these. I also added a few points that could be done. So all AI algorithms are being trained one way or another. So I mentioned here basically, if we are able to engage more human rights experts and civil rights lawyers into this process of training as well, and they will be able to distinguish the fine lines between and train the data on the fine lines between hateful content versus freedom of expression, for example, and that's one way to basically also get the assurance of these communities. And then finally, where I also mentioned here the other consideration of that our friend here, Ms. Khatib, was talking about on vulnerable communities and racialized communities, that also these sensitivities should be taken into consideration as you train these algorithms, and because you train these algorithms to identify patterns, to capture specific content. So the more you also in your setup you are engaging the right people, you will also avoid mishaps or additional profiling or additional targeting of some groups. And this cannot go without clear, as you institute this, not from a legislation perspective, but at least from a practice or a policy perspective internally, that there is always a way where you are have continuous oversight. Good thing that this technology also provides, this kind of technology, like a way to get a big picture view of what is happening, the trends, the traits, the reactions. And so the more you deal with big data and the ability to view everything, the more you can have wider oversight and follow-up of these issues and tools.
Thank you so much, because you kind of resonate around the area of oversight and the reporting, because in almost every presentation we have had so far, it speaks to the level of mistrust. And if there is mistrust, no matter what you tell me, until I can verify, then there is continued mistrust. And so I'm curious as to, are there any recommendations you have around what that reporting mechanism could look like, or infrastructure could look like, so that we can be transparent in how the data is collected and used and reported, so that we can build trust that the data that is being used is not being done in a harmful way?
Yes. So there are two parts of this discussion. One part is on the data collection, and then on the decisions and actions that are based on the data collection, right? So on the data collection here, basically the model that I'm recommending relies on public information. So it is not as intrusive, does not violate people's privacies and all this. And if we do it right, when it comes to what are we looking for in this data, and engage more from multiple communities and experts and human rights practitioners, we will be able to make it a more efficient tool to. It's basically a tool that gives you visibility at the end of the day. It's not a tool to collect evidence. It's not a tool to target individuals. It's a tool to give you visibility of what's happening and enables you to do decision making. On the decision making side, this is where legislation overlaps of what can the police use or not use, on basically the extent of the action that the police or the policing can get involved in based on the information that is being collected. I personally recommend the initial use of this kind of technology first to be, as I suggested, like as engaging as possible of multiple communities, and to be used not for immediate action, but morely for understanding behaviors, analysis, and then we come back and recommend action that is well reviewed, has political backing, and has community backing as well.
Thank you so much. Very informative. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming today. Oh, sorry, yes, Ahmed would like to make a comment as well.
I know we're behind, but I just have a comment. I'll keep it to a comment and then we'll wrap up. My concern is like the AI is really interesting, right? And it's just another mechanism for intelligence, and you spoke to many of those things. But the beginning and the end of this is my concern. The beginning is you spoke to, train algorithms, and that is where there's a point of risk around bias, right? Policing using preconceived perspectives on certain communities, and then the bias gets created, and so that's something that needs to be thought through. And the end, of course, is when you take this information, the preventative pieces was really interesting. Like imagine if you were able to monitor this and realize that someone was planning, like it got you to the point where your intelligence was able to tell you there's someone planning to drive his car into a Muslim family, for instance, the example you gave, the Afzal family. Can these things be prevented? Or when someone is beginning to be exposed to hate online, how do you work with that person to bring them back on track? And so those preventative approaches are, there's also a risk around overstepping someone's privacy, right? And someone's, because it could be viewed as a surveillance technology as well. But I am aware of examples where law enforcement agencies, when through other mechanisms, have identified someone who's being exposed to information that's influencing them to become more extreme, for example. Those agencies work with community organizations to help that individual, counsel that individual, work with the family. And so these things are also important, like in the big picture of how we use these. And if it's not done right in a healthy policing environment, there could be very high risk to these types of technologies. And so I'll leave my comment at that unless you want to wrap it up, but I have no question.
Thank you. I agree with what you're saying. Like briefly, just the point here, one key difference I'm suggesting versus surveillance technology is that using publicly available information. So that's a big distinction here, so that we don't invade people's privacy and so on. And I agree with you that the primary objective of using such tools is to be on the preventive side, to have a big picture, to deeply understand the issues as early as possible and not be spammed and overwhelmed with influx of irrelevant or distracting information. So I think and working with organizations, community organizations and other, I think is the key to have this as a total society solution. It's not just this sub-community versus this other sub-community. And thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to any presentation. I think it was very interesting, that for sure. Next, we have Mr. Mohammed Al Rashidi from Rashidi and Associates. Hello, good evening, sir. So the mic's already on. You have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when it's a 1-minute warning. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you. I thank everybody, esteemed panel, everybody that's here. I apologize also for the individuals behind me, including the chief. I apologize that I have to give my back as I speak to the esteemed panel in the front. Thank you for having me. My name is Mohammed Al Rashidi. I am a criminal lawyer in Peel. My firm is off of her Ontario down the street, so I'm very alive to the issues that are being discussed here today, and definitely have a lot of hands-on experience to share, and sort of looking forward to progress in all the work that everybody here is involved in. Working in the criminal law field here obviously gives you a lot of exposure to the police services and the work that they do. We also I decided about 8 years ago to do criminal advocacy work to be a more well-rounded individual, but also as a firm to have a good full picture of what happens on a day-to-day basis when dealing with crime or other legal matters closely connected to crime. I think there are a lot of challenges that we face here when we look at what the police board is trying to do and reform and make the changes. That's very clear. I think it's important to recognize that these challenges are even bigger than the Police Services Board. In other words, the systemic problems, and they are systemic, are not just about policing. The systemic problems exist throughout the entire system, and from my perspective, I would call it, say, the justice system. So the bias, all the other terms that we could use exist from the bench on down, whether it be with the crowns, whether it be justice of the peace, whether it be with judges, whether it be any individual that's involved in this. And because it is a societal issue, it is far bigger than any individual or even any organization. And with that mindset, I think it's important to see how far can we go as we try and make progress here, and how serious are we about making those changes. I have way too many examples to give of issues of discrimination or of individuals falling short, whether they be as police officers or as institutions closely aligned with law enforcement. And I sort of want to avoid going into too many anecdotes and too many examples. But there are plenty, and I would hope that everybody involved in the process recognizes that there is a problem. I think we need to begin with the recognition of the reality of racial profiling, of the reality of the problems that exist within the day-to-day services that are being provided. And with that foundation, we can begin to soberly assess what is being done. Clearly, there have been steps taken, and I mean, I look at this room and I compare it to how this room would have looked, several years ago, or even if this room would have even discussed this topic several years ago, and that in and of itself is definitely progress. And I look back to say the challenges that we face, say 2004, the docket at, say, Hensel Circle for Provincial Offences Court, if anybody remembers that court. And, the names on that docket have completely changed. And so there's a tremendous challenge, I think, for a police force, which you don't have a high turnover rate because it is a good profession, it is good careers. And so the police force is reflecting a completely different community, a community that has changed so dramatically. And that's not the fault, obviously, of the police. It's not the fault of really anyone involved, but it presents a real challenge. So what will we do about this challenge? And as I said, I can get into so many challenges and give many examples, but the question will be, what are those solutions? Clearly, the hiring process and addressing the language issue is a low-hanging fruit, is an easy one to do. And I think we've heard examples of that being addressed, and I'm glad to hear that. I think when you're able to bring in police officers who come, who speak those languages, you tend to also make progress on the cultural sensitivity training side, because that tends to come as a package. I think when we are looking for individuals to fill positions, whether they be in uniform or other positions, it's important to not fall into the trap of trying to tick a box. A safe example to give, I believe, would be, say, a U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, right? He ticks the Black community box, but the decision-making, the approach to case law is horrific for the Black community. In fact, it's probably the most anti-Black justice on the bench. So we want to be careful to, when we do go ahead and we do make these decisions, to find diversity and to appeal to the community and bring people that they actually represent that community, not just from a skin-deep perspective or a label of religion or whatever issue, that whatever box we're trying to take. So that's one element, to be a little bit more incisive in that. I think having a anti-racism type of committee, type of body, I don't know if that's something that is in place here.
My apologies, you have 1 minute.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think those are things that have been done. I remember having it done on the provincial level with the previous provincial government, putting those people in a room, having them make progress, and then having that close connection with the Police Services Board will, I think, create a lot of solutions that are very difficult to accomplish in these types of exchanges. I think I've also heard carding is no longer happening and all of that. And I think from a practical standpoint, yes, a lot of these things are no longer happening. However, on the practical side, you're still finding these nets that catch the same vulnerable minorities. I think of proactive policing, right, as something that is happening and tends to, from our experience, lead to the exact same thing, which is the vulnerable communities being caught in that net. So the questions here are the level of seriousness about addressing this problem. To conclude, the level of seriousness will be reflected in what type of steps are we taking. And are we taking those steps that allow for transparency and public involvement that is outside of just police force and internal dialogue? That would be a summation of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rashidi. I believe, Len Carby, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Rashidi, for the presentation. Not much of a question, but more of a comment. Part of the exercise here through these, interactions is for us to listen, but it also provides us a little bit of an opportunity for sharing of some of the things which are happening from the perspective of the Police Service Board and some of the initiatives that we're working on. And some of the things you spoke of speaks to things which may be happening that the community may not be very much aware of. For example, I'm not so sure how many people in our community are aware of the Human Rights Project, which is a project between the Police Service Board, the police, and the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I'm not so sure how many people are aware that there is actually an anti-racism committee that is working very closely, that guides the work. I'm not so sure how many people in our community are aware that there are nearly 80 recommendations by that same committee to the Police Service for change that needs to be implemented that are being worked on, completely adopted by the service with oversight of community. I'm not so sure how many people in our community engage in exercises like these so that they also hear what's happening from the police service side and from the board's oversight. So I think I'm taking a little bit of an opportunity here to use this platform to share that some of this work is actually in place. And my hope is that more of our community will engage. I was speaking with someone recently about doing a deputation here, and the response was, things seem to be going well. They're going on the right path, so I have nothing to say. And I asked, well, why not come and say that things are going on the right path? Because it's easy to come and say when things are, go through the challenges, go through where the opportunities are. But I think if there is feedback that our officers could hear, that the approach being used is being well received by community and the partnership is working, I think this provides a platform for that also. And there were several points in your presentation that spoke to that. So thank you for that feedback.
I appreciate that. I think that is, of course, incumbent on the Police Services Board to make that information more widely available. And I turn my mind as an example to how easily or how widely available your statistics are, say, on gun violence, right? If I'm conducting a bail hearing or if we're involved in any type of research, very quickly we'll be able to find your statistics on gun violence. But we don't find other type of statistics that can be very helpful in what we're talking about, whether it be the types of stops that occur broken down by race and other very vital information where when we say, if you want to be accountable, you've got to be counting. And if there's no counting taking place whatsoever, let alone sharing and all the more advanced steps, you're definitely not going to be making as much progress as you would like. And so that's the comparison I would use. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Amadati.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Rashidi. I have three questions. Just because you're living this, you have clients, you live the justice system. So recently, Peel Police and the board, we implemented body-worn cameras.
Yes.
And we implemented a policy operationally, and we implemented a policy at a board level, and now it's kind of rolled out completely, 100% being used in the region. I'm curious, what your experience is, and whether body-worn cameras, in fact, has met the intention. And it's a little early, but so just kind of your perspectives. Has it met the intention that we implemented it for, to and allow for accountability and trust for both, for the resident interacting with police officer, but also to give a complete picture to to support the police officer and their notes and their perspective to the interaction. So has it done its purpose from a human rights perspective, or are there things that you've seen that are you want to raise as problematic?
Yes, so I was actually quite perplexed when the proposals were made across the province and different police forces, and that debate was happening a few years ago. I was quite perplexed that some human rights activists were against having body cameras, and I couldn't understand why. I've listened to all the arguments, and they don't make any sense for somebody who runs trials regularly in our courts. It absolutely is a great tool in both to protect the public as well as every individual involved, starting from the officer on down. I really cannot wrap my head around how having that is going to be detrimental to the public. I mean, we hang on to every dot on those police officer notes. So to have audio and video added is obviously very, very helpful. And I can tell you, oftentimes we have to rely, if somebody was on a phone call and they had their earpiece on, so that there were somebody listening on the other side of the call to give us more information, because the more information, the more transparency you have, the more effective your policing will be, because you have a more just society, in the sense that everybody has a better idea of what has happened.
Thank you. My second question is, in the interaction with the resident, one of the accountability measures available to someone is to submit a complaint if they feel that something has not been done correctly, and there's a whole navigation of complaints and various different agencies who oversee complaints. So I'm just curious, your perspective, as if you've had clients who have submitted complaints. What is that experience like? Is it, from my perspective, there's a system that's working and complaints are dealt in an impartial way. And what is your perspective to that process?
Yes, so we would assist people if they needed to do that. It's number one, we get into the language issue, of course, is always a relevant one when dealing with these things. So aside from the language barriers that a lot of people meet in Peel, I think the process can definitely be more streamlined. I think the problem comes back to trust and perception. The perception, the public perception, to put it bluntly here, is that everything is rubber stamped, that you're not going to get a fair shake. So assuming you can overcome what we've heard the previous learned guests state about the attitudes that refugees bring, and that other communities who reside in Peel bring to the table in terms of how they perceive the police or authority, essentially. Assuming you can overcome all of that, and in most cases you do not. In most cases, people do not report things that they should report. I think there's a tremendous amount of underreporting. But when you do report it, the process can be somewhat cumbersome. I think you can get more assistance, the language being the main one. But at the end of the day, it's the disappointment in the results, I think, that have had the most impact on people and on their perception, rather than navigating the system in itself.
I'll just wrap up with a comment. For the last 4 years plus, we've been talking about diversity as a solution to better policing, or one of the solutions, and making sure our service represents the community. And something you said today, because we're very, the service has done a very good job at increasing the percentage on diversity, and I want to acknowledge that. But you said today, diversity does not solve human rights. I think you said something like that, and recruiting people who actually represent the community. And it strikes me because, this whole time, I got to admit, I think, you increase the number of members from the South Asian community, you get better service, right? And I think that's a little unfair to our police officers. Just because they associate with certain community, we expect that they understand that culture. We expect they understand the community, and so I don't know what the answer is, but I'm trying to bridge your comments because how do we create a service that better understands? We've heard things like cultural sensitivity training, and there's that can bridge that, but I think we have to be careful to expect that as we increase our percentage of diversity, that in itself solves, our issue around, service challenges that we have with different communities.
Yeah, for sure. It's much more complicated than that. But I think what I can attest to is, as somebody who's grown up in this community or raised in this community, but still has the language skills as well as the cultural sensitivities of say where my parents and grandparents have come from. I think what we're doing here is we're planting the seeds, right? And of course, we want immediate results, but I think it's the long-term impact of having that South Asian police officer intermingle with the, Italian or whatever other backgrounds, and eventually the end result is a very complete unit. I'm not saying that only, just to use that example of South Asian, that only a South Asian officer can be effective in dealing with a domestic call that involves South Asians. I think that would be a betrayal of what Canada is all about. I actually think it's that interaction and that camaraderie and closeness over time, through, of course, guided by training, where you're going to end up having the type of police force that you aim to have. So it is not about, having X, Y, Z in these positions because only X, Y, Z can relate to their fellow X, Y, Z. I think that's a very myopic view, and I hope we don't fall in that trap. And as a, Mississauga-raised person, it flies in the face of my life experience, and I know everyone else that has attended school here over many decades.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rashidi, for coming out tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Taya Gayur, from Executive Director from Justice for All Canada. Thank you, Mr. Gayur. The mic is on in front of you, and you have 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you're at a 1-minute warning. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, distinguished members of Peel Police Services, and my name is Taha Gayur. I'm Executive Director at Justice for All Canada, a human rights advocacy organization that focuses on, that is actually based in Peel region, and that defends the minority rights and challenges genocides globally. Our vision is to see a world enabled and protected by justice. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share a few words. Today, I address a matter of utmost importance, one that transcends borders and threatens the safety and well-being of minority communities in Canada and across the globe. I want to shed light on the rise of Islamophobia and the role of global ideologies in fostering hatred and discrimination against many in Canada. It is no secret that over the last decade, Canada has witnessed some of the ugliest, some of the worst and violent forms of Islamophobia in North America, including the Quebec mosque shooting on January 29, 2017, and the massacre of Afzal family in London, Ontario on June 6, 2021. But we have also seen other forms of organized anti-Muslim rhetoric and protests in the Peel region in particular that do not often make headlines, including protests against Friday or Jummah prayers Jummah prayers in Peel schools in the spring of 2017, led by people like Ron Banerjee and others who are known Islamophobes in Canada, or opposition to public broadcasting of adhan or call to prayer in Peel during COVID or spring of 2020, led by a group of Muslim haters who mobilized people on Facebook. And things like uproar against the construction of Barak Islamic Center in Brampton in December 2022 by hundreds of Peel residents who openly said they do not want outsiders in their neighborhood. Now, these campaigns of Islamophobia were not operating in a vacuum. They were clearly embedded in foreign ideologies of hate. The rise of Islamophobia is fueled by factors such as the politics of global wars, the rise of populist nationalism, and political rhetoric that unfairly stigmatizes and targets Muslims. And in Canada, we must also confront the presence of ideologies that contribute to this global disease. For instance, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, or RSS, is an organization with significant presence in Canada, which plays a role in promoting supremacist ideologies that target Muslims as well as Sikhs, Christians, and Dalits, both in India and around the world. RSS core doctrine, known as Hindutva, which glorifies Hitler's Nazi Germany, seeks to establish the dominance of Hinduism and Hindu values at the expense of religious and cultural diversity. And it's important to note, of course, that Hindutva is not the same as Hinduism, which is a religious tradition. These ideologies find a foothold in Canada through various means. They utilize online platforms to disseminate misinformation, establish educational chapters that provide ideological training, raise funds for global humanitarian projects, organize community events to attract individuals sympathetic to their cause. Moreover, the presence of RSS and its affiliates in Canada has already resulted in a disturbing trend of Islamophobia, anti-Sikh, and casteist incidents. These incidents include hate speech, threats, and even physical violence against individuals from minority communities. Sadly, we have witnessed a real-world consequence of these transnational ideologies through the recent alleged targeted killing of a Canadian Sikh activist, Hardeep Singh Najjar, in BC. So here are a few recommendations that I would like to share for Peel Police. Number one, evaluate the current understanding and response of Canadian police forces towards transnational extremist ideologies. There must be awareness of these growing trends within law enforcement agency, and it's imperative that Peel Police receiving training on recognizing and combating foreign supremacist ideologies. Number two, be vigilant in monitoring and addressing hate incidents stemming from these ideologies, both in person and online. Part of investigations of hate incidents and crimes should be to proactively make the necessary linkages to foreign populist trends and content that inform these perpetrators. Number three, ensure the safety and well-being of all communities in Canada, particularly those most vulnerable, such as human rights advocates and leaders of targeted communities. This would include preventative measures as well as proactive protection of those who have been targeted. And number four, develop dialogue and collaboration with human rights organizations and civil society groups to encounter these ideologies of hate. And the last, number five, have better integration and cooperation of intelligence on international extremist and nationalist groups. So we urge our institution, your institution, to prioritize human rights in your strategies and policies and to strengthen the trust between the community and police. Combating the rise of right-wing nationalism in Canada means working together to challenge the discrimination, hatred, and violence it fuels. So thank you once again for your attention, and I look forward to a constructive feedback.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
No, I'll just, we had an earlier speaker who touched on a similar idea, this idea of how transnational activities, ideology are finding their way into Canada, and particularly Peel because of its diversity, I guess. I don't think he said that, but I'm understanding that. It seems to me like a very, maybe, I'm just very, but it's a very complex issue. And a lot of different reasons that people do this and mobilize geopolitical. And how do you suggest that Peel Police and its team better understand, understand why this is happening? And I'm sure they have very experienced intelligence officers, but community can also contribute to understanding this. So do you have any suggestions about how community can work with Peel Police on this topic?
Yeah, I would say one of the recommendations that I mentioned is really working closely with human rights organizations, especially those that work on global human rights issues and are constantly monitoring these trends. And that will help inform, what are some trends and what are some patterns that we should be aware of. I think having more of these consultations, I think, would be wonderful. And just to give an idea, I think part of that is training. And part of those trainings could be, again, could be those who are actually, it could be led by those who are involved in combating these kinds of ideologies. And I'll give an example of where at times you have seen issues of lack of understanding or sense of urgency from police in addressing these issues. So we have had some events over the past few months, actually a few years, where we knew we were talking about. We were basically doing awareness event for the community, the wider community, and we knew, looking at, for instance, at times the types of people who were registering, that there may be some problematic names, and we knew in some cases who those individuals are, and we knew that they're going to disrupt the event. And we contacted Peel Police in one case. Another time it was Halton Police, and it was very difficult for us to explain and for them to understand why this is such an issue. And in one case, we did finally get Peel Police officers to come over and to help us just patrol the event, essentially. And at some point, we had to get them involved in actually getting 2 individuals out of that site. And the only reason why they were able to do it is because the same individuals whom we were concerned about actually had a trespassing offense before, and they were actually, for that reason, they were actually taken out of the premises. My point is that better understanding of people and of police or police in general, of the global trends, will help proactively deal with issues that involve communities, and especially those vulnerable communities that are addressing these issues of hate and Islamophobia in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Great, thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Richard Miller, who's the founder of Keep Six at Risk Youth and Policing. Good evening, sir. The mic is on in front of you, and you have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when there's a 1-minute warning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure here to be a part of this discussion. My name is Richard Miller. I'm the founder of Keep Six nonprofit organization. It's an organization I founded in 2017. And the purpose of the organization was my own lived experiences. I had my share of the justice system. And I'm sorry, it's just very touching. I wanted to make a change in young people's life. And what I found was when it came to the marginalized community, there was so much unjust. And I wanted to be a voice, but I wanted to make changes as life goes on. Keep Six, next. Keep Six is a nonprofit organization that caters to the marginalized community. Next. It was founded in 2017 by myself. I cater to youth and adults. I also advocate for individuals that's in the justice system. On a federal level, I had the opportunity even to be at the House of Commons last year to speak on gun violence. And this is a program that I created, and I had the support of Peel Regional Police to launch our program about 2 or 3 years ago. The program itself allowed young people to get out of the criminal lifestyle. And if they had a firearm, there's a criminal defense lawyer who is a part of my organization who's able to take that firearm from that youth and surrender it to the police department. One of the things I found in my own statistic and looking at was that one firearm in a person's hand can take the lives of 80 persons. So the opportunity I wanted to do was be able to build a rapport with the community and these young people, because if they had the trust in me and see the changes that I have made myself, they wanted to move forward in their lives. So I had the opportunity of building this program specifically along with in the trade sector, where individuals were able to get into the trades and have a good paying job in the trade sector. I myself, I've been in the trade sector for about 28 years, coming to the expiration date now for me. But I wanted to give the opportunity. Next, please. One of my focus is prevention, as I said, aimed to addressing poverty, because also I found out that poverty led to a lot of young people making bad choices. I found that at one time, I think I did a survey, and there was altogether 30 young men, and out of the 30 men, there was 12 of them was on anything from a first-degree murder, second-degree murder, to manslaughter. And after discussing with these men, they brought up a good point. They said, I've never had anybody be able to show me what you're showing me here today. Because if I had that opportunity, I would not be here, having that opportunity, conversation with you at this point in time. So I found that these things were very much important. I also found out that education, educating the key stakeholders in our justice system. Over the years, the last 6, 7 years, I've had the opportunity of being at the table with the stakeholders. Next, please. The three human rights and police, and the three elements: collective responsible engagement, trauma-informed approach, restorative justice practice. One of the ones, next please, I'd like to focus on is the collective responsive engagement. This is a fundamental component of modern policing that is not only enhance community safety, but also fosters the trust and collaboration between the law enforcement and the community and their serve. Next, training. Training police officers in trauma-informed practices is essential, very much essential, for promoting both physical and emotional safety for the community, and also the mental health and well-being of law enforcement. I found that a lot of police officers are just like us. They're human, they have feelings, they go through changes. The important thing is to be able to look about that well-being. Next, please. Thank you. Restorative justice practices can play a significant role in the strengthening of relationship between police and the community, promoting accountability. Next, please. What does the experience and research show us? Reduce bias, discrimination. That's very much important. The bias situation is a very large thing within the courts, within the justice system, and in the community itself. Next, please. What does our experience and research shows us? The mental health crisis we're going through right now. That's a very important one that I find that's in our community, that's affecting our community. And next, please. Also, I have to address the importance when it comes to the prevention itself in reductive rate. We have a lot of young people right now, they don't have the trust in the police because of their own experiences.
My apologies, sir. You're at time. If you want to maybe just wrap it up.
Sure, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Next. This is take a question. Next, just take a look. Building meaningful relationship with the stakeholders, that's a very big topic right now, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Lancarvy?
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your presentation. I'm being formal only because you are at this table. Typically, we refer to each other by our first name. So good to see you, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. I want to commend you and the Keep Six organization for leaning into the partnership with the Peel Police as it relates to the new community well-being focus that our police services leaning into. Certainly, this is the second presentation in the past few weeks that we have had from Keep Six. We benefited from some information from your executive director at our last police service board meeting on September 22nd. That was also quite informative, and it demonstrates what I was talking about earlier, which is the value of these engagements, talking about some of the strategies which are working, and that was highlighted by the presentation made at our board meeting and here again. So I don't have a question per se, but just a comment to say thank you for leaning into the strong partnership that you have with the Peel Police, and we asked then, so maybe I should ask now, is there one thing or two that you could recommend to us that we can do more in terms of leaning into that partnership that will support the organization like yours and others like yours, who are actually addressing a very vulnerable part of our community, which is at-risk youth?
I would say over the years, with the work that I've seen, the engagement part has played a big role. I found within the last, I would say, out of fairness, within the last 3 years, we've had several engagement events, but also myself, over the years, I've had the opportunity of even mentorship from someone from the Peel Police. And I think these engagements are what we really, really need. It builds that trust, and it kind of break that gap, and there's a gap that has to be built. I remember a couple of years ago at one of our back-to-school event where the DME unit came out and they set up their vehicles and stuff like that, and we had about 600 people or so came out, and the youth actually engaged with the officers. The officers took off their shirt, had a Keep Six t-shirt, ran the barbecue and so forth, and it was very positive. So we need more of those kind of engagement. I find over the last years, that's what I feel that the youth and the youth themselves are comfortable with that.
Awesome, thank you so much. I rest, no other questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Miller. This is a very meaningful presentation for me because, as Mr. Carby has mentioned, we got to hear a very operational level presentation from your executive director. And so putting these together, I now very much understand what Keep Six is doing and the important work that it does. There's a lot of things that you've said in your slides, you jumped through, and I apologize. I will ask for the PowerPoint so I can review in detail. But, you've talked about building trust and humanizing policing and meaningful relationships, educating youth. And these are all things that require both sides to work together, the police and the community or community organizations like yours. My question to you is, your slides, many of your slides said what we've learned, right? Because this has been an evolving space where people have been experimenting. The police have been trying different methods to outreach. Your organizations have been trying different things, and you've been learning. And so over the years of this learning process, is there a particular program with Peel Police or initiative that has proven to be successful, in your view, in helping at-risk youth, no longer interact with police, that needs to be better invested in resources or formalized as part of our policing approach or our community policing approach?
I would say yes. Over the years, the engagement that when it comes to Peel Police is one, the basketball, several have throughout the year, the basketball engagement with the actual everything from a 3-on-3 game with youth and the Peel Police basketball team. The youth themselves have a very big engagement with that. I've also been running a music program where I was able to get funding from Universal Record, where the youth, actually that might have been going that wrong path, chose music because music is one of their paths. So that engagement again has been supportive. And like I've said earlier, my experience and even the communication with the youths around Keep Sixth itself, that one-on-one or head-on communication with the officers, not in a uniform, but out of their uniform, the youth are so much comfortable. And I think that's where we continue, or I continue to try to build that relationship in our community for those things.
And just one last question. You've developed relationships in Peel Police over the years.
Right.
You mentioned you were mentored or, had a close relationship with someone in Peel Police, which has been helpful to you. But is there a formal liaison of some sort that your organization works with in Peel Police when you need access to the police or to communicate? How does it work formally?
Majority of our access over the years was always through the DME unit or whoever the superintendent is in charge. That has been my experience. Over the years for me, my interaction has changed because the individual who I might have been working with, they've moved on up the ladder and then someone came. So the problem has always been you built a relationship with a person for maybe a year or two, and then they're gone, and then you built another relationship and that person is gone. So it's that gap is always big. We have to start over again from scratch, right? At the present time, we are just working with individuals through the DME unit, out of fairness to say.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being patient. I know we went over time and you were last, so our regards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir, and commend you for all the work that you are doing. Thank you so much. That would be our last presentation for tonight. On behalf of my fellow board members, we'd like to thank everyone who came out to present and share their presentations. They were very valuable and we very much appreciate it. Thank you to Chief Nish and all the deputies and Peel Police staff that are here to listen with us tonight. Special thank you to our Executive Board Director, Robert Serpe, our Manager of Outreach, Angela Suri, for all the work put into making our second community outreach session happen. And also a special thank you to our council staff who also stayed today, Devneet, Harjeet, and from IT, Myron, thank you all for your help. Thank you everyone for coming.